I have spent my entire professional life telling stories, trying to convince others and solving other people's problems. Communication is important in research and also in policymaking, because today policymaking in particular is really about convincing others. And if other people cannot understand what you are doing or what you would like to be doing, then of course it doesn't really have much of an impact. A very serious real-life example of an aha moment was during the financial crisis here in Sweden in the early 90s, and when we held one of our first press conferences. And it was very, very clear that either we knew how to communicate and we knew what we were doing, or we did not, and the latter would have been absolutely disastrous. And out of that experience came this conclusion that in difficult times you better know what story you want to tell, and you have to make sure that your story is convincing. Stay honest and explain to people how you're going to solve the problem that is in front of you. Today, given that there are so many ways of communicating, I think we have learned the hard way that the written word comes far down the list. And that you see, for example, very clearly if you measure the number of clicks on the internet. So you just have to get used to the idea of talking to people sitting in front of a camera and doing those things that you have to do today, which of course means that you have to acquire new skills, new communication skills, which of course for some people might seem to be quite alien, given that you spent years and years studying math or teaching at the Stockholm School of Economics. The world is complicated, but most people accept that in a complicated world you have to simplify. And in order to convince others, simplifying is a must, because otherwise no one can remember what you have said. One way to deal with simplification is to always be prepared to answer follow-up questions. So if you simplify and people start asking more and more and more about the same thing, it is very, very convincing if you never stop replying, because then eventually they will conclude that this individual actually knows his stuff. The hardest thing when it comes to policy making is to communicate uncertainty. Most individuals want to listen to a good story about the future, and then they would like to think that that story is true. But when you deal with uncertainty, you know in advance that whatever story you come up with, things might change. And that's very, very hard to do and to communicate in a convincing way. I realized that when I was on, let's say, the evening news talking about monetary policy, most people did not really care all that much about monetary policy. What they wanted to hear was a story about to what extent is what this guy says affecting me in my daily life. And if I could explain that in that way, in that sequence, and then add an element of monetary policy at the end, then people would listen with a much higher likelihood compared to starting out with some technical aspect of monetary policy. Then I would have lost my audience almost immediately. When it comes to communicating research, it is such an effort to do research in itself. And research also has quite strict sort of rules in terms of the format of the research, how it is designed, how you communicate. But that communication is basically done within groups of researchers. And if that's where it stays, that might be fine, but from time to time, particularly if you do research that you really think matters also for policymakers, then you actually need to spend a bit of time on thinking about who is my audience, what is my story, And is my story communicated in a relevant and easy to understand way if my audience is policymakers? And that takes a bit of extra effort, and for some people it sort of comes naturally. For others, you can actually learn how to do it. And like many other things in life, research included, practice makes perfect.